Our guest in this segment is Seth DiStefano, Senior Policy Outreach Director for the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. Seth, good morning to you. Good to have you back again.
Good morning, Rob. Thanks for having me back. Good morning, everybody else.
Your phone line is garbled, sir.
How's that? Can you hear me a little better now?
I can. That's much better. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, wherever you are, stay in that position.
Don't move.
Exactly in this spot. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we get into our topic of the day, which is prison costs in West Virginia, your thoughts, first and foremost, on what's been going on in Charleston so far during this 60-day session. From our perspective, so far, not a whole lot has gotten back from Charleston to us to get any meat on the bone, so to speak. What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
I would agree. I think that there's definitely...
You're back to being garbled again, Seth.
I would agree with you in so much as I think that there are a couple of
Seth,
factors...
hey, Seth, call us back. Reestablish your signal, okay?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just hang up and call again. I just think we have a bad cell. I don't think anything we do is going to fix it other than calling again.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll wait for Seth to do that. I see his line is blinking right now. We'll get to that in a moment. Senator Jason Barrett is scheduled to be with us at 9:35. If his meeting with the governor ends in time, we'll get the full segment with him. If not, we'll get him whatever time he gets out of there, so long as it's before 10 o'clock. Bill Kearns will go over some of the health stuff that's going on in that 9:30 segment as well. And I believe Seth is back now. Seth, welcome back.
Hey, guys.
Oh, wow. What a difference.
What a difference.
Yeah, perfect. Back to our initial topic here, which was what are you hearing coming out of Charleston right now during this legislative session?
Wow. I think that there is, clearly some tension between the governor's office, our new governor, Patrick Morrisey, and the legislature regarding both, I think, substance and style when it comes to, achieving legislative priorities. I think kind of early off, the governor was shot down pretty hard on some things, and so we are kind of awaiting to see if he maybe takes a different approach. But aside from that, we're not really getting into a lot of, things that really impact the day-to-day lives of West Virginians. I would propose. I'm not really seeing, I'm seeing a lot of, culture war, gender, ideology type things, but nothing so far that, is going to, address higher costs of higher education or access to child care to families who, want to have a two-income household as opposed to a one-income household and things like that. So the first half, but again, there are two halves to a legislative session. I believe tomorrow marks day 30, and things can heat up very quickly down here, as you all well know.
Yeah, remember last year the first half of the session was really quiet. There wasn't much coming out at all. Now, on to the topic at hand, which is the amount of money the state spends incarcerating people. This was the subject of a letter that you recently wrote. West Virginia spends $271.7 million on prisons, $151.3 million on regional jails, $56.1 million on facilities for children, a total of $9.1 million total. And we had a couple interviews with county commissioners recently, and they talked about the escalating jail costs that we are seeing in Berkeley County, for instance, and that if it wasn't for the Day Report Center, we'd be spending well over $10 million a year incarcerating people on behalf of the state in Berkeley County. Seth, and your complaint is that the legislature keeps imposing stiffer and stiffer penalties, which add to more and more jail time, which adds to more and more costs being spent on jails by the state, correct?
Correct. And it's a great way of leading it off. The numbers you put out there are accurate, and they're also from fiscal year 2024. So from July 1st of 2023 to June 30th of 2024, West Virginia taxpayers shelled out over $479 million to fund prisons, regional jails, and juvenile facilities for kids. Rob and company, I just want you to know that's $100 million more than we spent in 2022, right? So these costs continue to escalate and spiral and continue to go up. And then in Finance Committee last week, the Department of Corrections testified that they're going to need another $50 million to pile on to that. So with this backdrop, I just kind of want folks to kind of set the stage here. One of the things we have seen this session is a tsunami of bills to enhance penalties to implement mandatory minimum sentences, take away judicial discretion when it comes to sentencing, and inevitably create more offenses that are both going to lead to more spiraling costs within our regional jail and prison system, both at the state level and at the county level as well, for reasons I can get into here in a minute. But before I hand it off, I do want to point out one other data point that I think is really, really important for the listeners to know, right? As of, I believe it was late February, DCR regularly does head counts in their facilities, as they should. And according to the Department of Corrections, in late February, our prisons were at 94.1% capacity, okay? Folks in regional jails who have been sentenced and are awaiting transfer to the prison system are in over 500 in number. And if you were to add them in, right, to that situation, they're waiting to transfer to the prison system, our prisons would be at 105% capacity. And so beyond just the, ever increasing, 50 million here, 20 million there, increasing costs for the Department of Corrections, if lawmakers in Charleston don't take a step back and acknowledge the cost of what they're doing when it comes to this tough on crime for everything approach, here in a couple of years, and it'll be sooner rather than later, the taxpayers of West Virginia are going to be forced or going to be told they have to shell out a couple $100 million to build a new facility. And that has trade-offs. That has real consequences.
Is the legislation that's being offered to toughen up penalties aimed at just violent offenders? Because I think we all agree we want violent offenders locked up and away from society.
I mean, I think that there are multiple bills floating around all over the place. I mean, at least for the first, I think, 3 weeks of legislative session, you couldn't look at a Judiciary Committee agenda without seeing a penalty enhancement of some sort. There are penalty enhancements that are, involved with things like first-degree homicide, second-degree homicide, involuntary manslaughter, other, mandatory minimum sentences. And kind of what I would say, it's like I don't disagree. People that scare us, right, we want to keep away from us. But at some point, we should take a hard look at, what's happening when we have such an aging population in prison, right? When you make it practically impossible for anyone to even see the parole board for the first time for decades, what you end up with is, having, as we do in West Virginia, dementia units and hospice units within the prison system. At some point, I think that we have to demand that our lawmakers should be having these conversations, as well, not just having these conversations, but they should be asking themselves, what are we going to ask the taxpayers to subsidize this situation? And I guess from a process perspective, Rob, one of the big complaints I have right now is that none of these bills, absolutely none of them, are being vetted by the Finance Committee, right? And so from a process perspective, this is really, really important. They're going straight to Judiciary, straight to the floor, being passed out and sent to the other chamber. There seems to be a concerted effort to not talk about the cost to taxpayers and the trade-offs, right, that you're making by saying, well, you know what, we're going to find X amount of tens of millions of dollars to, continue to advance incarceration at the expense of beds for treatment to address the public health crisis of addiction that is driving a lot of this problem in the first place.
So, Seth, this is Bill. You talked about our regional jails being overloaded with people that have been sentenced and awaiting transfer, which you're exactly correct. And is the solution for that to have more jails for them to be transferred to within our state, or what do you see the solution? And you're right, it's going to come with a price tag to have these facilities enlarged or new regional jails built. It comes with a price tag, and West Virginians are going to bear the cost of that. But is there a need for more regular sentence jails that are not regional jails?
You're not going to hear me advocate taxpayer dollars being spent for more bars or more prisons. To be honest with you, I think that there are far better uses for taxpayer dollars, especially when it comes to issues of public health and public safety. First of all, I think that a very, very large part, and to Rob's point, we don't want violent people walking our streets. We don't want people who scare us out on the streets. But I think that we need to be honest with ourselves that a very large part of our, incarceration problem in West Virginia has to do with substance use disorder, and that really is a public health crisis, right? And to the extent, jails don't really help with public health crises. So
I will not disagree with you on that one bit.
Yeah, and so I think that there are some things in the short term West Virginia should get a little bit more serious about to ease the burden of overcrowding. In general, I think that we do need to take a hard look at, the number of people we have that are significantly older in prison. In 2002, there were, I think, 445 people over age 50 in the West Virginia prisons. Today, there are over 1,300 people over age 50. More than one out of every of four people are 50 or older. There's 143 people over the age of 70, including 22 people over the age of 80. Right? At what point is really enough? And, some of these folks could qualify for a compassionate medical release. To what extent should our governor and legislature be looking at these to just, in the short term, to start easing the burden of overcrowding in the prisons, which is not good for people who are both housed there and especially not good for people who work there, right? And then secondly, I think that the legislature needs to take their foot off the gas pedal of these penalty enhancement bills, both, making it very difficult, if not impossible, for judges to exercise any discretion in cases, basically what we call the mandatory minimum sentencing schemes. And then, additionally, thinking long and hard about, creating, felonies that once used to be misdemeanors or creating jailable offenses where things used to not be jailable, because the impact on that isn't just the state budget, right? As was alluded to in the beginning of the conversation, our counties are on the front lines in this particular fiscal situation as well.
Tremendous.
Yeah, and just not to try to take up too much airtime, but I do want to reference during an interim committee meeting, I believe it was either last August or September, some county commissioners came down to Charleston and they testified in front of, I believe it was the Regional Jail and Prisons Committee at the time, and they laid it out on the line. They told lawmakers, listen, if these jail bills continue to increase, and, when someone gets picked up and, a magistrate sentences them to, pretrial incarceration, I think most times it's the county that picks up the check, right? They're the ones that have to pay the per diem. And if somebody gets, a $2,000 bail and they don't have $2,000 and they end up sitting there, for a month or longer, it's Berkeley County, it's, Kanawha County. They're the ones that pick up the price tag. And the point that the commissioners made that I thought was very resonant was that if we don't get this under control, if we don't find a way to both stabilize and reduce the fiscal burden that you are putting on the counties, essentially, we are going to have no choice but to go in and cut our support for things that our constituents like a lot, right? So like within the county budgets, you'll see line items all over the state for things like local senior centers, the Humane Society, parks and recreation. And so this is how, this is one example about how this all comes full circle and why it is so important for state lawmakers to fully vet in the most transparent and public way possible the costs to communities by these sweeping penalty enhancement bills.
Seth DiStefano is our guest here, Policy Outreach Director for the West Virginia Center for Budget and Policy, Maria.
So, Seth, what then is what's the answer? I mean, obviously the numbers are increasing, and as you pointed out, there are some proposals out there. I heard an interview with Delegate Kump talking about a particular issue of someone who was killed in a car accident, and he didn't feel that the penalties were severe enough for the person who had committed that particular crime. So what are the solutions here? More more work with, for example, treatment court and the day report center, which we have in Berkeley County.
But most counties don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a and just to put your outstanding question in perspective, Maria, think about the resources Berkeley County has when it comes to those types of things and the challenges that still remain in Berkeley County, right? coming up with what is really needed when it comes to, the public health aspect of this, and giving folks, maybe a pretrial diversion option of, getting your life together, maybe getting in treatment and or, finding a job or things like that. Berkeley County honestly has more resources to work with, and still has issues and trouble, bridging the gap here and there, let alone if you go to a Pocahontas County or, a Ritchie County or, some of these other counties that just are running on bare shoestring budgets, or are just in arrears when it comes to the jail bill. I mean, I think that, number one, sunlight is always a good thing when it comes to public policy making. I am very troubled and very concerned about the lack of any input from the finance committees on any of these bills. And I think that your listeners should be worried about that, and I think that it would be good for all of us to demand the state legislature do better when it comes to that particular sunlight. Because I do think once the public is confronted with the cost and the trade-off of the cost, right, well, we can spend $50 million more this year on a prison system that is overcrowded, that is constantly unsafe for both the people who are there, especially the people that work there, right? Overcrowded prisons are not good for guards or any of the staff that have to go to work there on a daily basis. Or we can get out in front of some of these things and work on preventative measures or work on measures upstream that will inevitably, and I think rather quickly, lower the number of people we send in the first place, right? I think that there is a lot of low-hanging fruit out there when it comes to these particular issues, but the legislature has to do their part. They have to be upfront and honest with the public about the costs, right? If you want to make everything a mandatory minimum, based on, this set of rules, if you want to take somebody's ability to get in front of the parole board from, 15 years to 25 years or 3 years to 5 years or 5 years to 10 years before they can even talk to the parole board, we need to be upfront with communities as to what the inevitable outcome of that is. With, so many things needing public investments, I really don't think setting the stage to, try to force the public to accept hundreds of millions of dollars building new facilities is in the best interest of anyone right now.
Have any of these laws been passed yet, Seth, that increase criminal time, jail time?
I think only one to my knowledge. So there's been a flurry that have started out in the House and made it over to the Senate, and another flurry that have started in the Senate and made it over to the House. I think that there has been, at least temporarily, some bit of a pause. That's not terribly uncommon before what we call crossover day in the legislature. Sometimes, the respective chambers will try to do as many of their bills that originate in their chamber. So like House will pass House bills and the Senate will pass Senate bills. And then the majority, now this is not always how it works, right? But the majority of bills from the other chamber tend to get passed after day 50.
So, Seth, when in looking at the proposed budget that Governor Morrisey has put out there, how do you see that in relation to what the previous administration's budget was, and is there adequate dollars being proposed for the budget? I know I heard you say about the, finance needs to be allocating more money and quickly, but how do you see the proposed budget for the governor addressing these problems?
I think that, the governor, to his credit, did fully fund Medicaid in his budget. Medicaid is the number one resource and tool we have when it comes to the public health crisis that is the opioid addiction and all of the bad things that come from that. So I would give him credit for that. Outside of that, I think Governor Morrisey has, continued flat budgets, if not, a small cut to departments across the board. I believe it was like a 2% cut that he proposed across the board for most departments, in addition to kind of collapsing line items, right? Something that the legislature is not real happy about. Last year you could go in and literally go, fair and festival by fair and festival by fair and festival, and like, vocational job, you could literally see line item by line item what the state was divvying out. It's not a bad way to have transparency in a budget. In most areas, Governor Morrisey has kind of collapsed those line items and just has said that my department heads will figure it out. To which there are, several line items that are, really important in this fight. The first of which I think is the Jobs and Hope program. I'm sure you all have talked about this on the radio show that takes folks in recovery and works to place them in a job where they can pay the bills and have a life. Right. That's an important part of recovery. That's an important part of addressing the public health crisis that we're in. That doesn't involve just warehousing people behind bars to the tune of about $35,000 a year to the taxpayer. So more to that come. I do foresee some changes, regarding the governor's budget. And as there always is, the House presents first this year, and we'll see what they do about that.
Does the state at this time, are you hearing anything about turning over some of these jails to private enterprises, the so-called quote-unquote for-profit prisons?
I have not heard any scuttle about that as of yet. To be 100% honest, I haven't really heard anything kind of, regarding that particular situation. I don't know how that would go over in West Virginia, to be honest with you. I remember as a younger kid in Randolph County, West Virginia. I grew up in the southern part of Randolph County, not far from Huttonsville, where there's a state prison. And there was talk at that time of trying to privatize that particular facility, and there was a huge public uproar over it. One, I have not heard, just FYI, but I also don't know that is a viable option, to be honest with you. Private prisons have pretty horrible track records when it comes to their treatment of the people in their charge, and really their employees, too.
About 2 minutes left here, Seth. The president of the Berkeley County Commission, Eddie Gokenauer, was on last week, and he's a strong advocate of having the state pay the jail bill. As you said, the state passes the laws. The counties have to pay for the people that are in the prisons. Any particular momentum you're hearing about that in the Capitol in terms of who's actually paying these jail costs? Because I understand that for some counties, the jail costs are so high they can't pay them, and it's defaulting to the state anyway.
Correct. But I also think, I don't foresee the legislature or governor, no matter who's in charge, right? I don't want to just saddle the people who are currently serving. I don't see them taking that on, to be 100% honest with you, right? I don't see them dipping into their own coffers to take on what they can currently push off on the counties, which is why I think it's important for the counties to step up and be active in this conversation, right? I know, several lawyers who do this kind of work. I also work with people who have done time. They've told me that just being charged with a felony makes it practically impossible to get bail in West Virginia, right? And so, when you see these bills that, take what used to be a misdemeanor and they increase the penalties to a felony based on A, B, and C, what that means in the short term is that there's going to be a lot of pretrial incarceration costs that counties have to pick up the tab for, right? And when counties have to do that, they aren't able to do other things, much in the way that the state isn't able to do other things like provide comprehensive, treatment for substance use disorder if we are continuously dumping tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into an incarceration system that, to be 100% honest with you, isn't addressing the public health side of this problem.
And on that note, Seth, we are out of time. I thank you very much for yours this morning.